Hello everyone, and you're very welcome to today's session of the new Farm Business Options series. My name is Barry Caslin, and the aim of Farm Business Options is to give landowners thinking of diversifying their income a good understanding of how to turn an idea into a viable business, and also to introduce you, the viewers, to agencies or parties who may be able to offer tangible assistance for specific project areas. Today's topic is the insurance requirements around farm diversifications. Our panel today includes Paddy Carey. Paddy is a business development manager at FBD Insurance. He's qualified as a certified insurance practitioner with 18 years experience in insurance. Currently, he works in the commercial insurance area, developing and growing relationships with key business-to-business partners. Ciaran Roche is the risk manager and also the company safety manager for FBD Insurance. He's a chartered health and safety professional with over 20 years experience in the field of risk management. Currently, he manages and develops FBD Insurance risk management policies, strategies, technical training, surveying program and safety campaigns. He has extensive experience in many working environments, including agriculture, food, retail, waste, manufacturing, and the construction industry. And our third panelist is Graham Kenny. And Graham's Kenny family have started diversifying their hilly farm called Ferryman Farm 25 years ago, starting with self-catering cottages and walks and trails. And then in 2014, Graham and Sandy developed part of the farm into a mountain bike park called Bike Park Ireland. So the aim has always been to utilise the farm for its best ability to enable the whole family to have a future while working at home. So very innovative thinking there indeed within the Kenny family. Done a lot of changes to the farm and diversified over a long number of years. Today's webinar is recorded, and a recorded version of this webinar will be available afterwards on the Teagasc website. We'd also love to hear from you, our viewers and listeners, through the chat function. So at the bottom of your screen, if you hover over it, there is the opportunity there of clicking on the chat function there and asking questions, which we can put to the panelists. So for those of you just joining us, you're very, very welcome, and we look forward to having your input as well, the viewers, during this session. So we're going to start off, if I can ask Ciaran. Ciaran, you're going to give a short presentation there on behalf of FBD and about insurance around diversification in general. And if you can just maybe share your screen with us now at this stage, Ciaran. And I know Paddy is going to come in on this as well, Paddy Carey from FBD, so you're going to share this presentation between the two of you. So good morning to you all.
Good morning, Barry. Thanks for that. My name is Paddy Carey, as Barry said, and I'll just kick off things today. Thanks for having us here today. I suppose the plan is we're going to give a brief 15-minute presentation, and that'll be followed by a Q&A session, as Barry has mentioned. We'll do our best to answer any questions that we can today. Any that we can't, we're happy to take them offline and come back to you with responses. So just to begin a little bit about FBD Insurance, FBD has been in business for over 50 years and grown into the largest Irish-owned insurer in the country, with over 500,000 customers. We've got 34 branches nationwide, so we have men and women on the ground who are happy to come and visit your premises and get to know you and get to know your business. I suppose FBD was set up by farmers. For farmers, and the landscape has changed a lot in farming in 50 years. What a farm looked like 50 years ago is very different to how it looks today. But we'd like to think that we have moved with the times in terms of the changes in farming practices over the years, and we feel the same about farm diversification. We want to move and work with our farming customers as they develop and grow their businesses and change their business. Now, there are some areas of farm diversification that are quite specialist. And listen, all we can do there is offer you the best advice we can. But I suppose our big advantage is that we're localized. We have a strong relationship with rural Ireland. We always have had, and we know farms and we know farm businesses. So just to chat a little bit then about insurance advice for new farm enterprises and diversifications. Any insurance contract is defined by the business description. So if the business description is farmer, then you're covered as a farmer. There's no cover for yogurt production, anaerobic digestion, or other areas of farm tourism. So that should be one big takeaway from today, I suppose, for people. You know, the farm insurance contract covers farm insurance only. So therefore, it'd be prudent that you would inform your insurer of any plans to diversify or any new activities that you have in mind, even before you begin the development. Now, you know, even before you begin the construction, you might say, God, I don't want to be thinking about insurance that far ahead of time. But I suppose, you know, you need to be talking to your insurer in the early days, because there are, as I mentioned, some areas of farm diversification that are quite specialist. And you don't want to have a situation where down the line you can't get insurance cover, or there's no insurance cover available, or, you know, the cost is prohibitive. So it's important to work with your insurer. Let them, you know, give you a little bit of advice along the way. So we would recommend that you talk to your insurer or us as early as possible. I suppose I don't want to say we've seen it all before, but we've seen lots, and you know, there's lots of little advice and pointers that we can give you to help you along your journey. So I suppose the advice would be talk early, even before construction, just to avoid issues down the line. It's also very important that you review your cover on an ongoing basis. Why is that so important? I suppose diversification can move very fast. You know, you could buy new machinery. You know, you need to be insuring that ASAP. You know, you might be developing new buildings, so you need to be insuring those. You know, you might change your business model slightly. You know, the guy who's in farm food production might decide he's going to farmers market, so he needs to inform his insurer of that as well. So I suppose keep in regular contact and make sure you are updating your cover on an ongoing basis. Next time, I'm just briefly going to go through the covers that you need to be thinking about. Farm insurance covers, I suppose, are different in a lot of ways to business insurance covers. Now, I'm not going to bog you down in detail, but I suppose briefly give you an overview of what's important and what you need to be thinking about. So the key covers to start with, the first one is employer's liability. You know, so on a farm and enterprise, you may have been working on your own. You may not have had any employers any employees in with you. But that's likely to change if you develop into a business. So it's something that you do need to give consideration to if you are bringing in outside help. You know, it's important that you're taking this into account, and that you're covering these people who you have working with you. Like, the last thing you want is an accident or someone being injured or out of work, and that's a huge aspect that you do need to be thinking about as you develop your business. The next key cover is public liability. I suppose public liability is similar no matter what kind of enterprise you are in. You know, you're looking mainly at injuries to people coming onto your premises. But that's one aspect that might change a little bit from the farm enterprise. You know, the farm didn't always have too many visitors coming onto the premises. But I suppose maybe I'm thinking of a farmer who might have got into food production and might be selling a little bit from the farm shop, and you know, all the locals in the nearby village are deciding that they're going to come up and sample the produce. So he needs to make sure that he has the proper cover in place to take account for any slip or trip or fall on the premises. So again, that's something to give consideration to. Products cover is the next one. Again, if I take the example of the farmer in food production, he needs to make sure that he has the proper cover in place. You know, if he's supplying a product that isn't right and, you know, it causes injury or illness or sickness, then he needs to have insurance cover in place for that. Environmental liability is quite a specialist cover. Some policies will cover a sudden and unforeseen accidental incident, such as maybe a vehicle in your yard hits a diesel tank and there's a spillage. But there's a specialist cover available out there as well that will cover contamination from a gradual cause. So the pipe that was leaking over time that you weren't aware of, you know, that's something that you might have to think about. And I suppose generally necessity for this type of cover is dictated by the type of industry that you're in. Moving on to property cover then. So this is a very important area when you start a new enterprise. you know, this is where your investment goes. This is the new infrastructure that you've put in place. It's the new building. It's the new piece of machinery that you've got that's going to be, you know, a game changer for your business. They're the things you want to be insuring. You know, if you've just paid 50,000 for a new machine and you haven't insured it, and there's a fire or a storm or whatever, then you know you're going to be badly out of pocket. And this is also where you need to insure your stock, you know, be it work in progress or finished goods, that needs to be reviewed very regularly. In a lot of cases, you might have times in the year where you will have stock levels much higher than at other times. So again, that's something that you need to be aware of and you need to be talking to your insurer about. Business interruption is basically covering your loss of profits following damage by an insured peril. So if you have a business where there's been a fire or a storm and you can't trade, it covers the loss of profits while you can't trade, subject to the indemnity period. So your standard farm insurance policy may not have that cover. So it's something different to be thinking about when you're talking about a new business enterprise. Landlord's liability, I suppose here I'm thinking about the person who might decide to let out a building. You know, there might be a shed on the farm that isn't getting much use. So you might decide to bring in a tenant. You know, it could be someone doing a bit of steel fabrication or doing machinery repair or, you know, any type of business really, I suppose. But you need to let your insurer know if there's a change of use of your farm buildings. As I say, the business description defines what's covered. So this has to be accurate. There should also be no ambiguity, I suppose, between you and the tenant in terms of what's covered. You know, you can cover the building, but they need to know that they need to have their own insurance for public liability and for their contents as well. Theft is the last thing, I suppose. We've all heard the stories of machinery being stolen, and it's an absolute sucker punch, you know, if the correct cover is not in place. So again, I'd advise you to look at that area as well. So they're the main areas of cover. There are other options, and our guys will happily sit down with you and talk you through them. But they do need to be given good consideration. I'll pass you over to Ciaran now, who will talk to you a little bit about risk management and insurance considerations and challenges.
Okay, thanks, Paddy.
Yeah, thanks very much, Paddy. I suppose really what I want to cover here are considerations and challenges in relation to insurance. I suppose number one, construction. You know, a lot of new businesses or enterprises may have to do some construction work, and that's not something that would be covered under your standard farm policy in relation to an alternative business. And even where you have someone coming in to construct a building, whether it be a contractor who's doing the entirety of the work, or you have numerous subcontractors, there's a legal obligation to appoint project supervisors, construction stage and design process. And if you don't appoint those individuals, you might find that you could be attached to the liability for a particular accident that might occur in relation to your negligence. And there have been cases as well where farmers and other persons have been prosecuted for not making those appointments. Change of use of buildings or farm buildings, which would be quite common. So originally it would have been designed as a farm building, but with that change of use, whether it be construction or a material change of use or an alteration, that building might now need a fire safety certificate, and the design of that building would be completely different. And again, later we can get into some of the detail on that if someone has any questions. Renewable energy, there are specialist insurance out there for those, and they pose specific challenges, whether it be an anaerobic digestion plant, wind energy, solar. We have a couple of anaerobic digesters, but ones that are directly related to farm. I know the risks that are associated with those would be the likes of explosion, hydrogen sulfide, environmental risks that Paddy talked about with specialist insurance that you'd have in place. Agritourism is a big area, and I suppose it's an area that's done very well in recent times. And these pose, I suppose, very significant challenges if they're not run very well or depending on the activities. So open farms would be something that generally would be quite comfortable with. But I suppose with any risk, it's only as good as its weakest link. So some of the activities, you know, on open farms are completely different to what would have been there on day one. So it's not just about the livestock anymore. It's about making it entertaining for people to come back over and over again, and activities for children. The likes of adventure centres, again, they're high risk. Any area where you have members of the public involved in activities, especially where they're quite robust or potentially dangerous, generally leads to high public liability premium and often non-attractive risk. Trails would be another example. Campsites, again, we insure the likes of campsites, but again, you will find a lot of these have developed over a period of time, so they'll have playgrounds, and that might be the greatest risk, or there's some other piece of enterprise on site that becomes the largest risk, and that's our greatest consideration. So the detail and that information is important to us. A lot of these places as well will have events. It could be at Christmas, Santa coming, Halloween. Again, you're bringing in new risk. A lot of people might bring them through forests. Lighting issues. Slips, trips, and falls are the most common type of claim you would see from a public liability perspective. Again, Easter, we'd have hunts, Easter egg hunts, and you have masses of crowds at any one time potentially on a site. So is the site designed for that? Have you considered it? Have you enough people there to manage it? And generally, in relation to any risk, the first thing you should always do is do a risk assessment. So look what the potential hazard is, what the risk is, and how you might go about controlling that particular risk. And elimination is always the best, and then avoidance of the risk or minimization of the risk. Farm shops and markets, again, very, very common, and Paddy talked about the product part of that, and that's key. But again, you're introducing members of the public, so your housekeeping, the erection of your facilities are really important. Food and drink, again, this is an area that we're comfortable in. But again, HACCP, licensing, registration, whether it be with food safety authorities, local authorities, or the Department of Agriculture, make sure that they are in place. But HACCP is the key piece. And again, we can look at this in more detail. And the last thing I'm going to comment on really is, the leasing of buildings. Very common, where you'll see, especially maybe a farmer possibly retiring or change use of buildings. But that risk is only as good as its weakest link. So for example, if one of the buildings is leased to someone who happens to be spray painting continuously, that's a high fire and explosion risk. So the rest of the risks will be based on that. So before you get into it, consider who might be there. Again, you might have more occupation on the site as well. So always risk assess, and have that conversation, I suppose, with your insurer. And I suppose to come back to where we started and where Paddy started, remember, it is always prudent to consider informing your insurer of any plans you have to diversify any type of new activity. Communicate before you start it, and especially before you start construction, because you may need insurance for that piece of construction that's going to be carried out. And definitely before anything comes into operation, because that's when the insurance risks starts. So thanks very much.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Ciaran. We are getting questions coming in already, so you can keep those questions coming in and we will put them to the panelists after a while. So Graham, if I could ask you please to start sharing your screen. You can, Graham Kenny from Bike Park Ireland is going to give a short presentation about what they do in Bike Park Ireland. And you can share the screen there now, Graham, and then we go into the Q&A directly after that. So as I said, there are questions already coming in, and we will take those directly after Graham's talk. And I have lots of questions, and that's what makes it all interesting. Okay, Graham, and you can maximize your screen.
Okay. Thanks, Barry. Okay, I'll just go through a couple of photographs here first of all, and it'll give a better idea of what we do. Okay. So Bike Park Ireland, we developed our farm. As you can see here, this is a map of 8 or 9 of the different trails that run our farm. That's our house there at the bottom. So we developed a lot of land that isn't very arable, and we had it as walks and trails for the last 25 years, and then we diversified into the mountain biking side of things. So we've got green trail for beginners, very easy trail for people just to meander down. Then we have the likes of a blue trail, another blue trail. So the blue trail is the intermediate standard. Then we're into red trails, which becomes a bit more technical. Then you're into black trails, which is for the expert riders, not for the beginners or intermediates. So we'd have 3 black trails. We have a lovely cafe on site. So this cafe here, again, exactly what Ciaran and Paddy are actually saying. Say 20 years ago, 2000, we built this as a reception area for walks and trails around the farm. But then we had to be in close contact with FBD all the time to let them know that we are now diversifying from a simple reception area where you might have a couple of people coming in at the weekends to now suddenly a couple of hundred people coming in at the weekends. So we would have been talking with our local FBD branch about that continuously, letting them know of any extensions that have been done to the place and stuff. We also have a bike shop. So we built that 2 years ago. Again, that's a converted shed. And again, we would be on to FBD about that and let them know that has gone from a hay shed to a bike shed. So we're a family-run business. Started diversifying 25 years ago. The self-catering cottages and walks and trails around the farm. So the farm, it is a beautiful farm. We're very lucky, but it is hilly. It's not all completely arable. So we had to make the best of what we had. So my parents would have planted forestry, 150 acres there 25 years ago. So in doing so, they won national awards in Munster, or won the national awards for forestry, and then Munster self-catering awards. Since we owned the bike park, we've attracted over 9,000 visitors per year, about 15,000 followers on Facebook. So we have a very, very popular activity. Our only issue with our bike park is that unfortunately there is nobody in Ireland that will actually insure this type of risk. So we've always had to go through different brokers, and all roads seem to lead to London, to Lloyd's over there for underwriters. But the rug was pulled from underneath us here in 2019, and we've gone from a very sustainable business that was employing both my parents, myself, my wife Sandy, 8 part-time people that are working locally, and 2 full-time people. I went from a very thriving business for going for 5 years to suddenly, like I said, the carpet was taken from underneath us, and we have no insurance. So we've been closed now for the last year and a half. So at the bike park, there's 8 trails for beginners, intermediate, advanced riders, a BMX track. We operate an uplift service where we can drive people up to the top of the trails. We've got bike shop, bike hire, cafe, showers and change rooms, bike wash area, and walks around the farm. So I'd say a fair idea is sort of investment that we've put into this place in the last 7 or 8 years. So we've held national motorcycling Ireland events. The national cross-country championships were held here a couple of years ago. We've held 2 national downhill championships as well. So this here would be a typical of a picture oversight with a drone shot of the forestry that we planted, and then we've been able to diversify walks and trails through it at the beginning, and now we've incorporated with cycling trails going through it. There's a typical shot of, say, our walking trails around the farm. That's it, really. That's us in a nutshell.
Great, Graham. A fascinating project and brilliant to see it. If you could just stop sharing your screen there at the moment, and we can go back to the panelist mode then. That's great. Great presentation and fantastic work going on there in Ballingarry in Tipperary, in North Tipperary. So thanks everyone for your presentations there. So there are questions coming in there for you, but I just want to kind of have a general discussion first of all, and we'll fly through the questions then afterwards. This just your area there now. You are involved in self-catering, Graham, and so that's I suppose agri-tourism and its accommodation provision, and there's insurance obviously associated with that as well. But I suppose the whole area of public liability insurance around adventure tourism. Have you had any claims, by the way, that on your farm?
We had two pending.
Okay. So it obviously is a high risk activity that you're doing. People are going on bikes, and there's different, it's like ski slopes. You have your black slopes and your blue slopes and your green slopes. So there is obviously a higher element of risk associated with it. But without public liability insurance, adventure tourism businesses can't really operate.
No, exactly. Yeah, no, it's good that it all revolves around public liability. as far as we're concerned.
If I can put that maybe to Ciaran or Paddy, what do you think about that as regards, this is one example. I suppose it's a higher risk that we're starting off with. We will be covering hospitality. We will be covering, change of use of buildings after a while and contracting, all of that. But just on this area of adventure tourism, are there options here?
Yeah, well, I'd say number one, in relation to any sort of tourism or any, and this is relevant to any agri-tourism, any adventure place, really it comes back to the risk. And I suppose from an assessment, from an insurance perspective, number one, they're going to look at the claims for that individual. They'll look at the claims for that sector, and then they'll look at the hazards, the risks, and the control measures. They'll look at individually in relation to the site, how that's been managed on that particular site. And that's where the scale of whether it be the sales representative, the underwriter or risk manager would be using their skills to assess it. There's some risks will obviously be outside of that appetite, and there's good reason for that as well. That's actually protecting the rest of the customers as well. If you insure a risk that's going to give you a high frequency of claims or cost a lot, that means that'll affect everything else on the book. So it's important to ensure that what you're insuring makes good business sense and that there's appropriate premium collected for it.
And can you get insurance in Ireland for that at the moment? Is it impossible, or do you have to go outside of Ireland to go to externally, or is there anywhere in Europe? Because we live in the EU now. Can we get this insurance anywhere in Europe?
Well, I suppose a lot of the markets for this type of activity would be in London, but it'd be through your local brokers. They'd have access to it, but it is definitely very challenging. And I do know it is a big issue. Even one or two claims, can completely change you as a risk or how insurers is actually looking at you. In some cases, the insurer have been very unlucky. They run quite a good operation, and just they may have been unlucky for the incident that did occur. Unfortunately, we live in a climate where people claim very easily. Slips, trips, and falls, even simple things, like a small pothole in the yard might lead to a claim. Generally, if people are injured on someone's site and they can apportion any negligence, a lot of people, put a claim in. And because of that, that's hyped up the price of insurance and made it unaffordable in some scenarios.
Yeah, there is a compensation culture out there, and it seems to be ruining things really for everybody. And the danger is now that I suppose some of these open farms, they may not open again, or they may be opening without any insurance, which is a big risk for themselves as well.
Yeah, and I suppose the other thing, maybe to give a good example, maybe if you come back to, for example, any open farm, or same with a lot of venture centres, a lot of them will have playgrounds. So there are certain standards for play equipment and surfaces, which, if you think of a fall, a surface is very important. The surface meets that particular standard. But a lot of equipment that historically has been put in might have been more local equipment, or maybe stuff that was made, looks reasonably okay. But in the event of a claim or an incident, everyone runs back to a standard. So did it comply with the standard? If it happens inside a building, did it comply with the building regulations? Was that slope too great on the ramp? Were the steps designed properly? Was there a handrail in place? So that's where they move back to the standards.
What are your options at this stage, Graham, insurance-wise? Because there are probably a lot of people looking at this saying, they may have options for other types of adventure tourism. It could be renting out a bicycle. They might have self-catering cottages on their farm, or they maybe have the old farmhouse that their parents lived in. They might decide to do that up for self-catering, and they may decide to give bikes to the tourists. That's obviously probably an adventure to a certain degree, maybe not as high risk, but is that activity in itself difficult to get insurance for?
Yeah, well, we'll have to do with the bike park specifically is we'll have to sit tight now until next year sometime. There is movement going on in government to try and change some legislation. They're trying to change the Occupiers Liability Act and the Civil Liabilities Act. It's all to do with trying to strengthen the waivers and notices that you'll have on your farm, so that the onus is put back on the customer as well as the actual business owner. The balance is very much on the one side of all the responsibility is on the business owner, as opposed to the duty of care should be also on the participant. So right now, so the way we built up we've always been with FBD for as long as we can remember, 40, 50 years. So we've always been talking to them coming up through the farm, and then when we got into the walks and trails and self-catering, and the FPD still covers for that, but it comes at a stage where they assess the risk, and we always had a fair idea, even before the bike park was still a brainchild, that we would be speaking to them to see would they be insuring it, and that's when they would say would have drawn the line with us with that type of risk. So we would have gone then to a broker, who hence has gone to the UK. So we have a lot of stuff still insured with FBD, and that's very important to us. But they're always very straight with us as well. That look, there's a level that they can go to, and after that, then it's out of their in layman's language, to me, it's out of their comfort zone. And then we're into specific.
And we have heard that the compensation claims culture is, I suppose, contributing to a lot of this as well. Is there any sign of that to change, Ciaran? Have you got any feedback on that? That we have heard within government circles that there will be a change to in terms of the amount of payments that will be made on one-off claims like this. That obviously is increasing the risk for you, the insurers, as well, for these high payouts. Is there any sign of a change on the horizon there? Because what Graham is doing there, it's a very, very interesting project. It's innovative. It's providing an activity in rural areas. It's bringing, he said he had 9,000 customers there per year. It's bringing people into a rural area. He has the accommodation. So it's everything that an economy needs. And I suppose we have this little stumbling block whereby he can't get the insurance. Do you see something changing here, or anything on the horizon?
Yeah, well, hopefully it will, and it needs to change at that level. I suppose, if we look over the last decade, some of the significant things that we would have seen is, the cost of a typical claim has gone up. Some studies have come out in relation to, the cost in relation to litigation could be 40% of a claim. We also had the amounts that can be awarded in the district court, circuit court, etc., have increased. And when they increased, we actually saw the sum being awarded increased as well. So a lot of work needs to be done, I suppose, to change that. And I suppose we have to wait and see. And I suppose it's in everyone's interest. It's in our interest. It's in our customers' interest, really, to get something done there that makes a real difference.
Mm-hmm. I suppose new risks generally centre on health and safety. And what kind of measures can be introduced by landowners that demonstrate safety environment to insurers? Is it adequate signage, or is it securing access to potentially dangerous areas? What are the kind of things that you would advise in the area of hospitality, for example?
Yeah, well, I think the simple thing, you start off, and the big language for it is the safety management system. But really, if you look at a safety statement, and a safety statement identifies a policy and arrangements on how you're going to manage safety on site. And then on top of that, to do a risk assessment. So actually look at every single risk you have on site, and or every hazard, identify what the potential risks are and how you can control those. And there's various things that can be done. Now, generally, if you look at the principles of prevention, they start off with, you try to avoid the risk. So can I avoid the risk in the first place? Then you evaluate it and see, can you reduce it to a minimum? Can you adapt your working measures to make it safer? Can you use less dangerous articles? So, for example, if it happens to be a chemical, you might be able to use one that isn't particularly hazardous. You give priority to collective protection controls. So, for example, it could be safety guard railing to prevent someone from falling over an edge, rather than once they fall, you have something that might catch them. And actually, when we look at those measures in place, the likes of PPE, so personal protective equipment, that actually comes at the very end of the principles of prevention. So it's all about avoidance first and managing the risk. And that's why you do your risk assessment. Signage is important, but it's limited. And coming back to what Graham was saying there in relation to the Occupiers Liability Act that came into place, it does put a huge amount of onus on the occupier of a land in relation to a visitor who comes to their site. So they have to take all reasonable precautions to ensure their safety. It is less for a trespasser and recreation user. And there actually has been 2 test cases in relation to that. There was one in the southwest of Ireland. That particular case, a lady had fallen over the edge of a cliff where she was having a picnic. In first instance, that went to the High Court, and it found 75% against the farm owners. But it went to the Supreme Court. It was a very important case, and that was overturned, and it was found in favour of the farmer, and they weren't found liable because they were recreation users and they didn't act recklessly for that injury to occur in the first place.
Was that an open farm, or was that somebody just?
No, No, just a standard farm. It was a standard farm. Yeah, it was at the edge of a cliff. And I think in first case, they had talked about signage and fencing, but then I suppose when they looked back at it in reflection, it was thought, well, that was it was asking too much of the landowner. But it was an important test case, and there has been another test case as well, and both of those have found in favour of the landowner in relation to the recreational user.
Question here, many diversifications lead to large sums of cash being taken, stored and transported. Can this additional risk be covered?
Yeah, Barry, I might take that one. Yeah, that's definitely something we can work with guys on. I suppose the same as any risk, we'll sit down, we'll talk through the business, what's going on, we'll assess the risk, we'll see what can be put in place to ensure that the security is of a good standard and that kind of thing. But it's definitely something that we can sit down and discuss. So I suppose I'd encourage anyone to get in touch with their local office and our branch managers and sales executives will chat through that with the customers.
Okay. If we can move on to the area of the food and drink production, like is anything that involves food production becomes beyond the common raw unprocessed farm commodities is likely to need additional cover, especially in the area of product liability. And can you discuss that a bit with us there about what types of cover? So you might have a farmer who's maybe going to produce cheese on their farm, convert their milk into yogurt or into an ice cream. What type, and they're going to sell that. If somebody gets ill taking that, how can they indemnify themselves?
Yeah, I suppose I might deal first of all with the products liability piece, and I might let Ciaran then chat about some of the other pieces. But yeah, definitely, as I mentioned earlier, products cover is something that's vital for anyone who's involved in food or drink production. It wouldn't be something that's covered under your standard farm policy. So we would definitely advise that you should look at that. What you're covering there is, there's an issue with the product and someone gets sick or injured or ill or whatever the case may be. I suppose your common example is somebody bites into a piece of food and there's a piece of metal or a piece of plastic or something that has got into it and a tooth is damaged or something like that. That's your kind of standard claim that we would see. So that's your products liability piece. There is a further piece called product recall, which is quite a specialist cover. I suppose that's a little bit different to your standard products cover. That's generally where there's contamination, and the policy can be triggered by accidental contamination or malicious contamination or that kind of thing. And it generally would reimburse people for the pre-recall expenses like analysis, chemical analysis, that kind of thing, recall expenses like transport, overtime, additional warehousing, that kind of thing, and then third-party recall expenses, loss of gross profits, all that kind of thing. So, but that is quite specialist. Your standard piece is the products cover. That's generally the run-of-the-mill that people will get involved in from the start. Sometimes some of the larger supermarkets and that kind of thing can put the onus on you to get the product recall piece in place as well. But generally, your products cover is sufficient.
Yeah, because claims for resulting in illness, we say, or maybe recalls, they could be extremely costly. So I presume that the risk, the premium is probably costly as well in that regard.
The product recall cover, yeah, the premium can be prohibitive, to be honest, which it does tend to be an expensive cover.
Yeah, okay. I presume it's important to be aware as well of, if we're looking at food and drink production as well, to be aware of Food Safety Authority of Ireland or government regulations around food and requirements, and maybe any licensing or permissions that are needed. Yeah, and to be able to demonstrate that you're complying with all of those requirements.
Yeah, I think that's really important, I suppose. And I suppose we will always do a risk assessment, whether it be the underwriter or whether it's going to be the sales executive, or in more detail, maybe done by a risk surveyor. And what we're looking at what is the exact product. Is it a raw material? Is it being manufactured? Is it being processed? Where has it been imported from? Where is it actually going to be exported to? And these are important questions around the cover. Are they registered with the Department of Agriculture? Are they registered with Food Safety Authority or a local authority? Then the business itself, is there a HACCP plan in place? Like HACCP is critical in relation to any food that's going to be produced, and it's the cornerstone really, or the safety management system for food production. So it's important that happens to be in place. And then we look at other standards they might have in place. So they might have a BRC standard, they might have Board BIA, they might have an ISO standard or Global Gap, QMark, and all those give us reassurances about the standard that this company is working to. And then the underwriter can make fully decision, good knowledge in place. And again, that can help in relation to a rating perspective. They understand actually this company is going over and beyond, or they do really, really well. They're working to all these particular standards.
Is there insurance here to cover the value of goods and production in stock? That's the question that's come in. So is there insurance to cover the value of goods and produce in stock? Is that maybe Paddy? Would you answer that one?
Sorry, I kind of half lost you there, Barry. But I think what you were getting at there was stock cover, be it work in progress and that kind of thing, or finished goods. I just mentioned that earlier in the piece about the property insurance. Like that's a hugely important one for people as well. They have their ingredients, they have their work in progress, and then they will develop that into the finished good and the finished article. So sometimes people will make the error of when they're asked the question about, what level of stock will you have on your premises, they might err and say, just think of, say, the finished goods, but they have to think of more than that. They have to think of all the items that they have on the premises in terms of stock. The other piece as well is, stock levels can fluctuate depending on, take for example, someone involved in turkey production. At Christmas, their stock levels are going to be, obviously much, much higher than they will be in the likes of January. So you need to be thinking about that when you're discussing that with your insurer as well, because they do fluctuate.
I presume it's something that needs to be kept under review as a business grows as well, stock levels.
100%, yeah.
A lease may specify, for example, that certain types of waste must be removed from the site daily. Is that something that is important to be looking at if somebody is leasing a premises, that they're looking at, the waste material that's been removed off site? Or I suppose it's just not good enough to assume that it's been done. Is that something that should be checked out, that it's been done as well?
Yeah, well, typically if we look even from a fire perspective, there's numerous risks in relation to waste, but from a fire perspective, about a third of all commercial fires relate to sort of arson. So the likes of pallets, compact bill, and then someone maliciously putting it on fire and then causing damage to the building. So that just shows the importance of removing something or keeping it a distance away from the building. So it's simple, just good housekeeping practice as well. Generally, you'll know when you walk into a business within 5 or 10 seconds whether it's a good risk or not. If housekeeping is good, generally everything else is good, because that person has pride in their business and their operation, and they do everything well. If you walk in and housekeeping is poor, generally it's a reflection on everything else as well, that there's other things that are being let slip as well, and that they don't have that same pride and control in relation to the management on site. And especially when we're involved in members of the public and we look at slips, trips and falls, it could be just a simple bag or a piece of string or something like that. It could be something that could cause someone to trip. So there's a couple of risks in relation to, there's slips, trips and falls, but there's also the fire risk in relation to removal of waste.
A question here on the change of use of farm buildings. So new activities in farm buildings will probably bring new risks, and failure to inform the insurers probably could result in a loss of cover. Where somebody changes the use of their building depending on the risk posed, what should they be looking at? What type of insurance should they be looking at? I suppose it depends on the risk posed there, really, isn't it? And depends on the business activity. Yeah,
well, I think one of the key things here, if you have a material change of use or an alteration to a building, so if we take an agricultural building and now we're going to change that into accommodation, there's a different set of standards that are there under our building regulations, and you need to comply with that set of standards. So, and you will need to get a fire safety certificate for it as well. And that will actually change the complete design of it in relation to a fire safety perspective, in relation to escape from the site, the materials that it's constructed with internally, so it'll be maybe non-retardant or fire-rated materials. You might have fire compartmentation, so you may have a kitchen and you might have a 1-hour fire compartmentation. So that means if there's a fire within that kitchen, it can't spread to the rest of the building for at least an hour. So these are all design considerations. But when you go to get your fire safety certificate, your architect or engineer will have designed your building to comply with that standard. And that's what your fire safety certificate is based on. The same if you change the use of it. If it was an agricultural building and now you're using it for something else, again, that building may need that change. So it'll depend on what the change happens to be. But if you're going from an agricultural building that was used for cattle or hay or something like that, and it's going to be used for an area where a member of the public will be, you can be pretty sure that it'll come under a fire safety certificate.
Okay. I presume it's important as well when you're letting out maybe a farm building or renting it maybe to somebody else that wants to develop a business around it, that it's very clear what the role of the tenant is and what the role of the landlord is. Like, is it generally a case that the landlord ensures the fabric of the building while the tenant is responsible for their own equipment, their staff and products? Would that be the general run of things?
I think it can be a mixture. So it depends on whatever agreement you have in place. So generally you sign up to a contract. Some contracts are that the person who is taking over the building is responsible for maintenance, and others it'll be that the person who owns the building is responsible for that piece. So it depends on that particular piece. Again, there's different types of risks. So if I was taking a shell of a building and I was actually fitting that out internally and I was putting my own electrics into it and my own equipment, obviously I'm going to be responsible for all of that. And you might actually get the building fully rewired as well for your purposes that you need it for. I do think it's really important that you consider that whatever that building is used for, if that happens to be beside another building or another risk, that when an insurance company looks at the whole set of buildings, we're looking at which is the weakest link in it. So for example, if we had a food risk that had deep fat frying and you had polystyrene composite panels, which are a high risk with a highly combustible material within the building, if a fire takes off there, there's a good chance it could take out the entirety of all the buildings that are there. So your rate would be based on the weakest link or the poorest risk. Would be in that range of buildings. So you need to consider that because that will come back to you as well.
Okay. Yeah, Paddy, go on ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, Barry. Can I just pick up on that point very briefly there? Just in terms of if you are letting building out to somebody who's coming in and you know whatever they might be doing there, it would be well worth recommending, and we would always advise our customers to get sight of the tenant's insurance schedule. You know, sometimes they might say to you, "Oh yeah, we've our own cover in place for whatever, for public liability or employer's liability or property," but it would definitely be worth recommending that you look for a sight of that before you agree to any terms of a contract or lease agreement or whatever, just to be on the safe side.
There's a question in there, or a comment in relation to the activity tour or adventure tourism that we were discussing about earlier. So that New Zealand has taken a very good lead in this area, where businesses pay levies to the Accident Compensation Corporation, whatever that is, in accordance to the risk of the activity. Have you heard about that, Graham, yourself? What they're doing?
Yeah. New Zealand is way ahead of the posse when it comes to that kind of stuff.
So there are best practice examples there, and it can work in other jurisdictions. So it might be something just to be aware of. You know. Can I just ask you in the area of contracting? You know, agri-contracting, many farmers are diversifying that way as well, that they might decide to maybe have a digger, and they might be doing hire work, they might be doing silage making. What type of insurance cover is needed here? Is it public liability or business interruption? Or what type of cover should contractors be looking at?
Generally, what we see, Barry, is that people who are diversifying into agricultural contracting would mainly take out the public liability and the employer's liability. They're the two main aspects that they would take out. I suppose agricultural contracting is an interesting one in that, you know, for years in rural Ireland, we've seen farmers who are kind of operating under the culture of mehel, where you know, the neighbour is doing silage or whatever, and they'll give a dig out, and you know, and vice versa. And I suppose we look at that as in terms of how it is, and you know, that's all part of rural Ireland. But somebody who is involved in agricultural contracting, who is charging a fee, obviously, and who is doing it on a widespread basis, there is no cover under the standard farm policy for that. And they need to ensure that they have a separate business policy in place, primarily covering employers' liability and public liability for whatever aspect of contracting they're doing, be it hedge cutting, be it whatever other agricultural contracting they're involved.
And Paddy, there have been situations where maybe a contractor has jeopardised maybe the subsidies or the entitlements of a farmer by maybe removing a ditch or maybe removing something that he shouldn't have removed. Is there insurance to cover this?
Generally not that I'm familiar with. Barry, Ciaran, I don't know if you have any knowledge on that.
Can't add to it, Paddy.
Yeah.
We can look into it in more detail, Barry, but not that we're aware of at the moment.
Yeah, okay.
Barry, just on the contractor, like what we have seen as well over a period of time is what typically might be an agricultural contractor, and now they've got in maybe a machine and they're doing a little bit of digging, maybe a trench or two, and next thing they move into, they're doing groundwork, so they move towards construction. And construction really isn't an agricultural contractor, but it ends up being part of their business. And then they stray, maybe it's an area that works really well for them, and they keep on moving in that direction. And really that's not sort of the agricultural contracting risk typically that we would look at. That's moving more to construction. And that's quite common that would happen, but it is really important if someone moves in that direction to make their insurer aware of it, because they would be insured a typical sort of agri type risk rather than a construction risk.
Okay, thanks for that, Ciaran.
One further piece there, sorry, Barry, is which I should have mentioned is like for an agricultural contractor, machinery is a huge investment for them. They spend an awful lot of money, a huge investment into their machines, their tractors, their attachments. And that's something that they really have to think about when it comes to insurance cover. Couldn't say that enough to you how important it is, and we know the contractors associations out there as well are also pushing that they would pay a lot of detail to the machinery they have and ensure that they are all properly insured.
Okay, folks, we have a lot of questions to get through here, but is there a risk that operators of renewable energy? So we've discussed most of the areas at this stage, but on the area of renewable energy, we're going to see 70% of our electricity coming from renewables by 2030. We're going to see wind farms developed in Ireland. We're going to see solar farms developed. We're going to see anaerobic digesters being built on farms, hydroelectric schemes. We'll see battery storage. We're going to see biomass boilers going in. And there's going to be a whole, I suppose, level of risk associated with that as well. Some that may be associated with schemes. Farmers might be getting an SSRH payment. Or there may be refit payments or microelectricity scheme payments in the future. Is there some type of insurance that you can take out to protect yourself against those policies if you get a product or maybe a technology of inferior quality or anything like that?
Yeah, well, I think it's a very specialist market for starters, I suppose, the likes of anaerobic digesters, wind, solar, and there's specialist insurers in the market that look at all those bits and pieces. But it is really important to look at the detail of it. So, what the conditions are, what the warranties are, the detail of cover. Often a lot of the cover relates to the installer, the contracts, the maintenance contracts that they have in place and the guarantees that they happen to give. So the detail is in there, but it's not an area, I suppose, of speciality to FBD. We do have a few anaerobic digesters where we have those. Generally they relate to a risk that's connected to a farm business. A lot of the anaerobic digesters now take a lot of waste in from recycling and from waste risks, so they're more of a waste risk than actually an agri type of risk. But the risks associated with them are quite considerable. I mentioned some of them earlier in relation to the gases, hydrogen sulfide, the explosion, confined spaces, biological hazards, electrical hazards, the mechanics of it, and as well from an environmental perspective. If you think of one of these very large tanks, full of waste material happens to collapse, the amount of environmental damage that can do. So and that's specialist insurance as well. So it's quite a specialist area.
And is that an area that FBD or that farmers in Ireland who build these plants can get specialist advice from FBD, or is it available within the country at all, or do you have to go outside of Ireland to get that sort of insurance? Because I've seen even in the UK where a lot of these renewable projects have already been developed, such as biogas plants, and I'm always hearing back that the policies are very often insufficient and really putting the viability of such projects in jeopardy.
Yeah, well, I think as an industry, we're learning the whole time. So, like, if you Google tomorrow, failure of an anaerobic digester plant, you're going to get loads of samples of where tanks collapsed, where there was explosions, and often because it was either a manual failure, so human error, or it may have been a design failure. And as they get better and better, and technology gets better, and we learn more, I think the market will become more comfortable with these type of technologies. But I think a lot of it at the moment, again, is quite specialist.
Okay, thanks. And also one area as well, Ciaran and Paddy, maybe it's for you. A lot of farmers are getting grants at the moment through TAMS, the Target Agriculture Modernisation Scheme, to put solar PV on the roofs of their sheds. And those investments could be maybe over €1,000 per kilowatt. They might be putting 20 kilowatt, maybe 40 kilowatt PV arrays on the roofs of their sheds. It's quite a significant investment. It might be a 4-year payback on that, maybe a 5-year payback, depending on what the electricity is being used for. But can they insure for that potential if there's a heavy fall of snow and the roof falls in, and that the technology becomes damaged? Can they insure themselves? Because it's a very pertinent question there at the moment.
Yeah, Barry, I suppose as we mentioned earlier, FBD are trying to learn and move at farming practices as they develop, and this is one of the new things that we have seen come over the last couple of years. And I suppose the advantage we have again is that we have our people on the ground who can go out and visit the farm buildings and have a look at the structures and see what's taking place there. But yeah, I suppose the short answer is we do cover solar PVs. The cover we'd offer would be the same as what's on the building itself. It'd be fire, lightning, explosion, and storm kind of cover that we would offer. But again, I'd recommend you talk to your guys locally. They'll go out, they'll assess it, they'll give you a little bit of advice, and we can work with you on it.
Paddy and guys, if you could answer these questions as quickly as possible, because we're coming towards the end here now. Question there from Alan Jackson. Paddy, if a farmer wants to sell some produce off the farm to local health stores or online, does product liability cover recalls and other things that can go wrong? I think you've actually covered that already, Paddy.
Yeah, we covered that one, I think. Yeah.
You was talking about linseed, hemp seed, oats, that kind of stuff there. Yeah. Another question, Dan McDonald suggests that he talks to David Brazabon, who is operating Belmont Domain in the Bray Greystones Road. They may be able to assist in obtaining insurance. That's maybe another option. Why don't FBD cover boundaries, for example, fence damage, with their farm insurance? That's an anomalous. Why don't FBD cover boundaries, fence damage, with their farm insurance? Is that something you want to comment on, Paddy?
I suppose I'd have to look into the individual case. If we can take that one offline if you want, and if they want to send us on the details, we're happy to look into it for them, no problem.
Okay. Graham, outside COVID restrictions, are you closed altogether due to the lack of insurance cover? Can any business start up with this restriction? Can any business start up with this restriction in the long term? Graham.
Yeah, no, we're very definitely not closed forever. We're literally sitting tight and waiting for the opportunity for the insurance sector to open up again. Yeah, we're just very, very lucky. Look, we're all entrepreneurs. Anybody that's thinking of trying to diversify their farm in any shape or form is an entrepreneur, big, small, or indifferent. And we've always been shaping our way of life for the last God knows how long. So no sooner was the bike park closed, an opportunity came up for us then to set up a construction company and go and build mountain bike trails. And we've secured a couple of tenders now with Quilcha, building Sleeve Bloom mountain bike trails in the Sleeve Bloom Mountains.
Very good.
So one door closed, another door opens, but this door certainly is not closed because we will reopen.
Okay, that's fantastic that you're finding a new opportunity at this moment. But
at the same time, Barry, it's very important to know that the reason why we all diversify our farms is we want to work on our farms. I don't want to be leaving my house every day to go and build trails somewhere else. I have my own network. Absolutely. And anyone that's trying to diversify, the reason is because they love their farm and they want to live there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I'm doing right now is not necessarily what I want to do, but it's a means to get by until we can reopen the bike park.
Okay, we need to go through these very, very quickly. If you have people visiting your farm for day trips, walks, etc., does a signed waiver offer you any real protection? Very quickly, if you could answer that, Paddy, or
Yeah, a sign helps us limited. So if the person is there for recreational use, what the law would say is as long as you don't intentionally injure that person or the property. But if they're invited onto the property, they become a visitor, and you must take all reasonable precautions to ensure their safety. And the other consideration is if you actually know people are actually using that trail on a continual basis, if you know of a risk, you should go about eliminating that particular risk. So
Okay.
it can help, but it's limited.
Okay, is there any examples of digital tools that are helping you to manage risk in farm diversification, software, apps, procedures? Ciaran, could you answer that quickly?
Yeah, BSmart. BSmart is a free tool from the Health and Safety Authority. It's www.bsmart.ie, and that covers hundreds of different enterprises. And if you have a farm, it's www.farmsafely.com is the online risk assessment for farmers.
Okay, Geraldine O'Sullivan question here. What would you recommend regarding public liability for a right-of-way through your land over a stream? If someone hurts themselves crossing the stream on your side, can they sue you even if you have public liability? And would you cover that?
Well, I haven't fully grasped what that question was. But anybody can sue for starters, and then it will come back to whether the person was liable or not. If there's public liability insurance in place, that individual has it. It'll protect the individual who has the public liability. That's public liability insurance.
If they hurt themselves on your side.
It's to protect that person if they have insurance in place. It's for the person, the landowner.
Okay. The question about where on the Teagasc website is it possible to download the videos? It's actually on the teagasc.ie on the webinars section there. You can find it there. If you are renting out your cattle shed, same use as they don't have insurance. If you are renting out a cattle shed, same use and they don't have insurance, will my own public liability insurance cover any events? So that's if you're taking somebody else's shed. Will your insurance extend to that? I presume you just have to notify the insurer.
Yeah, it's very important that you notify your insurer if you're leasing a shed, whatever the use of it might be it farm or otherwise. But I'm not sure if I picked it up correctly. But I think the question there was, will your insurance cover them? And the answer, I suppose, is no. Anyone that's coming on to your premises, they should have their own insurance in place. You're protecting yourself, and they need to protect themselves too. So I think it's very important that before you let out any buildings or whatever, that you make sure that whoever you're letting them to has the adequate insurance.
Yeah, I think the question there, Paddy, was that if you're taking somebody else's shed and you already have your insurance, will your current insurance extend to that new shed that you're taking?
Oh, sorry. Okay, so if you're extending, then yeah, contact your own insurer. It's just adding on possibly a new location onto your policy or whatever, and there's no difficulty with that. Yeah.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks very much, folks. And we're out of time there. And that's all for today's program. Just a reminder that the full program is available as a recorded version on the Teagasc website. On next week's Farm Business Options, my colleague Cian Condon will be discussing the option of goat farming in Ireland, from goat meat to dairy production. He'll have a very fantastic panel there discussing that whole option. I'd like to thank my panel today: Ciaran Roche from FBD, Paddy Carey from FBD, and Graham Kenny from Bike Park Ireland, a great entrepreneur down there in Ballingarry and County Tipperary. Thank you all. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you all again next week. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.